Good afternoon to you. Mark Stott of HurricaneTrack.com here. Hurricane Outlook and Discussion Time. It is Monday, the 16th day of November 2020, and the big headline today is obviously Category 5 Hurricane Iota. It's just crazy that I'm even saying that. It's the 9th Greek letter name storm. It's the 9th name storm in the Greek alphabet. We've exhausted all 21 names of the normal list of names. That is a 6-year rotating list of names. There's 21 letters. We omit Q, U, X, Y, and Z. I don't know who came up with that and when they did, but I guess there's just not enough names with those letters, I guess, in the international community. I don't know. I don't make it up. I'm just telling you. And now we have gone 9 letters deep into the Greek alphabet, and we are probably not done yet. So let's just get on with it. We got a lot to talk about today. First of all, where do we stand in terms of the statistics? I like looking at statistics. They are important indicators of where we are and where we might be going. We're looking here at this particular row, and it is the North Atlantic. Name storms, 30 name storms. Wow, 116 days out of this hurricane season, we've been dealing with name storms. The hurricane season is only 183 days. That's incredible. We've had 13 hurricanes out of those 30 name storms. So almost half of the name storms became hurricanes. We've had 33 hurricane days, so more than a month of hurricane days. We've had 6 major hurricanes, which are Category 3 or higher, 8 major hurricane days, and this one's important, and I'll explain why again in just a moment. And then, of course, our ACE, the accumulated cyclone energy, how much energy has been expended. That number, it's just an index, is 173 for 2020. Now, the major hurricane days being only 8, that's pretty low overall. It's only a little bit above the long-term average of 6. And the reason that that is fairly low is because these have become major hurricanes, most of them, pretty close to land. And so they became a major hurricane, and then within a couple of days they made landfall. And so we haven't had any of these really long track hurricanes like Irma or Maria, if you think back to those, or Hurricane Ike as an example. And it's interesting because these intense hurricanes have become intense close to land, and that has been a big change from what we have seen over the last several years, when, especially the last 15 years, when it appeared that our landfalling storms were going to weaken right before landfall. So something different there. All right, so the sea surface temperature anomalies. This is a big driver as to why we're seeing what we are seeing. These cold, relative to average temperatures here, these cooler anomalies in the Pacific. This is that La Nina that we've heard about. And then you've got this interesting little area right here, right off of Central America, in the extreme southeastern Pacific, that has cooled off, kind of separate from this La Nina pattern out here. Interesting. I don't know why. I don't know what it just kind of popped up in the last few weeks. But then, on the flip side of the landmass over here, we've got much warmer water temperatures relative to average, and that has really helped to fuel what we have been seeing, especially since October. We kind of had a gradual ramp up at the early part of August there. I guess you could say even late July with Hannah. So we had Hannah, excuse me, then we had Isaias, and then it just went on from there, and we rattled off, all the way through the end of the alphabet and into October, and then things really, really got busy. In October, normally things are supposed to calm down. And here we are at the middle part of November, and we have a Category 5 hurricane down in the Caribbean. Upper ocean heat content still formidable down in this region where Iota is located, but it's not, ridiculously high. That's the area that I just drew in that rectangle where Iota has traversed, but still enough warm, deep water, and that's important to note. It's not just the skin of the water surface, it's very deep. In some cases, many tens of meters deep, maybe a couple hundred meters deep, that warm water column goes way down So these hurricanes churn up just more warm water, and they just basically wick that water into a frenzy. They whip it and they wick it. They wick it up, like if you stick a towel, a Bounty paper towel, in a cup of water and it wicks it up. The hurricanes literally do that out of that warm water pool down there, and as they churn up and whip up the seas, it's just whipping up more warm water, and it actually pulls it directly into the core. And we could see that just a little bit in our Hurricane Michael video from Mexico Beach. It's amazing. We're still learning from that GoPro video, where you could literally see how the ocean gets turned into this pressure washer mist, but it's so densely packed and it's whipped up into a frenzy, and it's very warm, and it translates it directly into the core. Very, very fascinating. If it would just be out over the open ocean and not bother shipping interest in land areas, I think we could all marvel at this a lot more, but it becomes very dangerous when you get these systems developing like this and they come into land. Michael did the same up here in 2018. We had Dorian do it over here in the Bahamas. A lot to learn in terms of how the core of an intense hurricane operates, but you see all this upper ocean heat content out here, and there's still plenty of it as we go on into the latter part of November, what should be the closing 2 weeks of the hurricane season, and I think we're going to see more activity. And this helps to bolster that argument here from Eric Webb, a tweet not too long ago that the Caribbean refuses to cool down, even after a ton of tropical cyclones and intense hurricanes the past few months. The La Nina, I showed you that abnormal cooling of the tropical Pacific, an active monsoon gyre, and that's just this circulation pattern down here that just kind of sits here. It's contrary to the normal trades. Normally the trade winds kind of blow through here, and they're fairly brisk. They can be, and they can haul butt through here and kind of stir things up. But this monsoonal gyre that sits down here kind of acts as a big speed bump. So these trade winds that are normally hauling through here, they kind of start to slow down. And when they do that, you have a piling up of the air through here. It's called convergence. And then, because it's colder over here in the Pacific, the air is slowing down as well. And so you just get this big wall in here, if you will, where the air piles up like a whole bunch of elephants running in tandem. And the front end of the line collapses, and all the other elephants just kind of tumble over. I know that's a heck of a visual, but that's what's going on here, at least part of it. That active monsoon gyre, and even the tropical cyclones themselves are feeding into the large-scale circulation, he goes on to say, reducing the low-level easterlies, like I just showed you, offsetting, that's incredible, it's offsetting any cooling due to tropical cyclone-induced upwelling. And we can go back and we can look at the anomalies here. There are no cold anomalies down here. You don't see any of these tracks, these cold wakes, no little blue streak down in the Caribbean from Eta. Not up here, not down here. It's just not there because the pattern has been sort of feeding back on itself and allowing systems to just keep on going. And you can see that the 850 millibar wind anomalies down here, they're different. They've slowed down, and that's really helped to not only pile the air up and make it converge, but also to warm the water because the wind didn't blow in as fast through there. And here's the result. Category 5, Hurricane Iota. Luckily, if you can call it that, it is probably off of its peak. Nevertheless, look at that. That's just remarkable. The amount of lightning in the core is absolutely incredible. And I do want to see if I can zoom in here. I think this will let me. I want to zoom in right to that core and just show you this. Really neat tool here from weathernerds.org, weathernerds.org. We can loop this and just look at that core and all the core lightning. How is that lightning detected from a geostationary satellite? Well, it's using sophisticated technology. It's proprietary, right? That's what they say, isn't it? It is. It's amazing what the scientists have been able to do, that we can detect lightning flashes from satellites 23,000 miles geostationary. They are high above the Earth, and they sit still, geostationary, that's what that means, and they're able to detect this. Why is lightning in the core so important? Well, I'll tell you. When you have that intense updraft going on, those clouds that go up, you create a lot of upward motion, and you get those ice crystals up there, and you get very intense convection, that fancy word for thunderstorms. And we see all that lightning in there. That is indicative of very intense upward motion. These hot towers, as they're called, the core of the hurricane, right around obviously the middle of it. It's not quite in the middle of the central dense overcast. I'll show you that in just a second. But let's just freeze it on the last frame. There's your eye wall. It is wider at the top, narrower down near the surface. It's not quite down to the surface, you know what I mean? The ceiling is, I don't know what the ceiling in a hurricane is. Probably, the ceiling is the bottom of the clouds, like a ceiling in a room. 5,000-6,000 feet, maybe higher. It's a very good question. I've never thought of it. Nevertheless, look at all that lightning, generally in the southwest side at this point in time, and just a very, very intense cyclone. Pressure's down 920 millibars and lower as recon has gone in here and crisscrossed the area, getting all kinds of data. Kind of does that little alpha pattern. Remarkable. It really is. It's just a shame that this is going to cause so much heartache and misery for our fellow humans down here in Nicaragua first, and then Honduras. You've got this little island over here, Providencia, I think it's called, and then is it St. Andres Island or something like that? I can't remember off the top of my head, but you have these two little islands out there, Providencia. These are Colombian, South America, Colombian government authority, from what I understand. Providencia there got close to a direct hit from the southern eye wall earlier today. So we'll have to see what kind of information comes out of there in terms of any damage. But this donut, this central dense overcast, that's the deepest convection where it's pressing up against the stratosphere. That's all heading towards landfall over here in Nicaragua. And then the big story from there is going to be this terrible, terrible rainfall footprint that's going to set up in here over the mountainous terrain, a giant circulation, and it's going to flood again some of the areas where Eta impacted recently. I definitely think we're going to have a higher loss of life count this time around, unfortunately, and there's nothing we can do. We can just hope that social media and the word of the Nicaraguan government, the local villages down there, a lot of it is beautiful, lush jungle, a lot of river basins and marshy areas, and then you get into the rugged terrain not far from the coast over here in that orographic lift where that higher terrain lifts the moisture up, squeezes it out. You're going to get tremendous rainfall, terrible flooding down those river valleys. We're going to see, again, some pretty frightening and borderline horrific images coming out over the next week or so. Interesting that since 2016, I'm telling you, I'm starting to take note of this. 5 seasons in a row, going back to 2016, we had Matthew as a Category 5, and that was in October. Interestingly enough, it became a major hurricane, by the way, on September 30th, a Category 5 hurricane in October. 2017, we had Category 5 Irma, and that was a Cat 5 for a long time through here. Remember, Irma racked up just insane amounts of ace points. Not long after Irma, there was Maria. Who can forget that? Also a Cat 5. So that's 2 years in a row, 16, 17. And then in 18, also in October, and at a fairly high latitude up here. I mean, you remember? Good grief, it was just incredible. Michael. And we had equipment set up to capture that at point blank range. Made landfall during the day, so forth and so on. That's 3 years in a row. 4th year in a row, last year, Dorian. And you remember the legacy of Dorian. Category 5 here, menacing, devastating, any other adjective that you want. Parts of the Bahamas and some of the storm chasers down there, some legendary video and photos coming from that. So that makes 4 years in a row. But not to be outdone, in the same year, we had Lorenzo. kind of an out of area, not the typical area. Lorenzo became a Cat 5 out here, farthest east, kind of removed from the deep tropics, a very interesting setup that allowed Lorenzo last year in 2019, of course, to become Cat 5. And then this year, I would argue, and I would bet, that Eta will be upgraded to Cat 5 down here in the postseason analysis. The hurricane specialists will look at the data. They'll look at the aircraft data much closer. They'll have time in the off season, and they will scrutinize it. And they will, in my opinion, I don't have any inside connections. I don't have any influence. I do not have a dog in that fight, as they say. There's no benefit to me if Eta becomes a Cat 5 in post-analysis. But I'm just looking at the data, looking at the recon info. Don't be surprised if Eta became a Cat 5 before it made landfall. And it weakened before it made landfall. But at some point, I believe Eta was a Cat 5. Nevertheless, we know that Iota is a Cat 5. So now, that is 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 5 years consecutive that we have had Category 5 hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin. That is alarming. That if it continues on, for several more years, it could mean something. And I know there's going to be people that are going to say it already means something. It's just too short a sample size, but it's got my attention. Definitely. That's concerning. We went a long time. I can't even remember before Matthew when the last Category 5 was in the Atlantic Basin. That just shows you it's been a long time before Matthew, and then boom, 5 years in a row. That is alarming. That's definitely, like I said, it's got my attention and something we'll be paying attention to closely going through the rest of this season and then certainly in 2021. Speaking of the rest of this season, Jack Sillen tweeting this the other day, more green, which is upward motion here, forecast for where? The Atlantic Basin. When? From this part of November where we are now, actually this is where we are right now, and the green is all upward motion, and this is going into the future as you go down the chart here. So all of this would be heading into the future, and the future suggests more upward motion for the Atlantic Basin and even over the Indian Ocean, which will just fuel more activity probably even as we get into December. And you can see that it continues on, generally unabated here, no sinking motion, all the way to the end of November. There's November 25th right there, and this is applicable for this part of the tropics. Just to give you an example. And all this here is sinking motion, and where? It's out here across the Nino regions, where the state of the ENSO is currently La Nina. This is from the Euro, the EPS, this is from the GFS ensembles, and they're both in excellent agreement. So, as Jack said, still looking for a clear sinking air signal to finally end this damn hurricane season. I mean, it's getting there, right? It's ridiculous. Still not finding very much, he says. Big MJO sinking pulse over the Pacific. It seems to just skip right over the Caribbean. Wow. So, there you go. It's looking like it's going to continue to be fairly active, and then the Climate Prediction Center echoes the same in their global tropical hazards and benefits outlook. Hazards and benefits, that's a good way to put it. In the current time frame between now and tomorrow, the last couple days through tomorrow, possible cyclogenesis out here in the Caribbean and parts of the extreme southwest Atlantic week 2, leading up to near Thanksgiving. More activity seems likely, probable to likely, whatever you want to call it, in the area where Iota is today. And that brings me to the current wide satellite shot. A couple things I want to point out. Look at Iota and look at the gigantic upper anticyclone around it. What is that, you might ask? An anticyclone. It doesn't sound, it sounds like it's negative, anticyclone. Well, it's the opposite of a cyclone. It's a very simple term. And in the northern hemisphere, that anticyclone, the wind is spanning out in a clockwise fashion. Underneath that anticyclone, almost perfectly located, not quite, but it certainly was last night, it seemed, is Iota. Why is that important? It is important because wind is not cutting across Iota like this. It's not cutting across this way. And, there's just a little bit of southeasterly shear where the wind displaces that CDO, the central dense overcast. It's, when it's perfectly vertical, you get a Cat 5, like what we saw earlier today and presumably through now. So that anticyclone sitting right over that region, this is so cool. This is a satellite picture. So this is real. This is what's happening. And this is the analysis from the GFS at the 200 millibar level, way up at what we call the outflow level. And just look at this huge area of anticyclonic flow all around down here in the Caribbean. Outflow channels over here to help whisk that air away. Wow, that's what it looks like on the modeling. It's one thing to see it on a satellite picture like this, but to see it analyzed in the global models like the GFS here, this is what we look for when we look to see if something has the potential to develop. Here's Iota in the modeling. It was just a little bit more to the east earlier, obviously, and this is where the conditions were perfect. And it likely reached its peak intensity, and that could be potentially even revised in the postseason as well. But as for now, it's definitely very strong, and it's sitting down here in this very favorable environment. And up to the north, no, not even close to favorable. Look at all that wind cutting across from west to east. And then over here, you've got this little pinched off tropical upper tropospheric trough or TUT. Yep, the sweet spot, not so sweet for people that live in land, etc. But man, there you go. That's what it looks like. All right, so real quick, I look ahead from the GFS over the next week or so. Here is Iota in the 850 millibar level. The previous map was way up at 200 millibars. This one way up high. This one's lower, the lower 5,000 feet. That's the vorticity signature. That dense, height-lined, all compacted in there is the intense low pressure of the hurricane. And watch what happens. We move this forward. It makes landfall in Nicaragua. That low-level energy starts to wane, and then the rain and the moisture continues, wrung out by the mountains. And then look what happens. It's just ridiculous. There's another area. This is that giant monsoonal flow, that gyre that Eric Webb was talking about. And you can see that in here, the way that the wind curls around. It's just perfect for convergence, and this is the next candidate right there. It's setting up. Immediately after Iota makes landfall, boom, we start to get a circulation developing, and the pattern stays favorable. Another cyclone, possibly by 4 days, a tropical cyclone. What would this be, Lambda or something? The 10th? The 10th Greek alphabet tropical cyclone? Just say that, the 10th. It's what it looks like. And it makes landfall south, hopefully. If there's anything positive to say, it would make landfall south of where Iota did, but then it pops into the Pacific, and it might try to find a new life over there. And then, yes, I'm not kidding you, it's like it just keeps on going down here, spitting out potentially more and more between now and the next week or so. There's a week out, and yes, that is a potential subtropical system that tries to develop off the southeast coast. Upper level winds are going to be too strong coming out of this way for it to amount to anything, so don't worry about it. But boy, oh boy, to think we could be knocking on the door of 33, 34, maybe 35 named storms by the end of December if this keeps going this way. And that upward motion chart that I showed you suggests that we could squeak out another several named storms, maybe 5 more before the end of the season. Wouldn't be surprised at all at this point. So this is truly one of the most remarkable hurricane outlook and discussion videos that I've ever put together. It's definitely going to rank up there in terms of what we talked about, the subject of it. Whether or not tens of thousands of people end up watching it, that doesn't matter as much as what this particular update signified. That we are looking at history in the making, and it's happening right in front of us. We saw it coming to some extent. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be like this, but we had some clues back in April and May, maybe as far back as March, that the La Nina could be coming. The Atlantic was going to be quite a bit warmer than average, and the models were suggesting, the climate models, favorable upward motion, favorable conditions for the Atlantic Basin. I just don't think any of us anticipated it being like this. And until it happens, and it is happening, it's hard to know, oh, then all of a sudden we're in it. Just truly, truly incredible what we are seeing. All right, as always, I appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget, we are supported by our great crowdfunding group. I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow because I've got a couple of big announcements to make, and I'm going to wait until tomorrow to do so. But we are supported by Patreon, patreon.com/HurricaneTrack, if you want to become part of that. And again, as always, thank you for tuning in from your side of the screen. I do appreciate it very much. Have a great rest of your Monday. Stay safe out there and all that implies. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.